Hey class, in this video I want to talk about the first 10 chapters of Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy. So when you look at the first 10 chapters, it might seem like the topics that he's addressing are a little random, but there is a order and a method to what he's doing. And so the focus in the Discourses on Livy is on republics, and part of what he wants to do in the opening chapters is lay out his general theory of republics. Right? And a republic, in Machiavelli's sense of the term, is just a city that is ruled in some way by the people. Whether this is done through a sort of direct democracy, as in ancient Athens, or through representation via elections, or through some other system, is not determined. But the basic idea is a self-governing city. It's not under the sway of anyone else, and it is not ruled by hereditary monarchs or anything like that. In the beginning of the text, in chapter 1, he talks about the beginnings of cities. How do cities in general start? And that might seem like a strange question, but you can understand the importance of the question if you rephrase it, as in, why and how does it come that human beings live together in communities? Machiavelli's answer is that this basically happens by accident. It's an accident that people come and live together. And this is an important point for him, sort of the accidentality of us living in cities, because it sets him apart from people like Plato, Aristotle, Xenophon, and sort of the general Greek tradition, which thought that living together in the polis was the natural condition of the human being, right? So Aristotle famously says that human beings are political animals, by which he means that we are the kind of animal whose natural environment is the polis, the city. Machiavelli is separating himself from that view. Right? It's only an accident that we live in cities, that there is nothing natural about us living together in communities. So you might say, well, why is that important? Because if living together in a community is artificial, then it is going to take more work to make that happen and make that work and to make it continue working. Natural processes will just happen without a whole lot of thought or effort, right? So that I'm not thinking about breathing right now, but I'm just breathing because that's a natural process. But things that are not natural, things that are artificial, you could say, require training, they require discipline, they require effort. And Machiavelli's point is that this is what living in a city requires. It requires training, discipline, and effort. The question then is, well, what are these different kinds of cities that we could live in, different kinds of republics? And he mentions a couple different ones, a couple different examples. So, of course, there's Rome. Then he also mentions Athens. He mentions Venice, and he mentions Sparta. And these cities that he mentions are important. Each one represents a different way of organizing life together. Athens, as we know, is like the democracy, right? Democratic Athens. Sparta, on the other hand, was a very strict, almost sort of military dictatorship. Venice was La Serenissima, right? It was the most serene city. The Venetian Republic lasted for over 1,000 years. The Venetian Republic lasted for 1,000 years, and it was characterized by this sort of calmness and tranquility in their political affairs, because of their strict limitations on who could stand for office, how you could be chosen for office, and how the offices were run. Right? The Venetian Republic stands in contrast to Florence, which is, of course, Machiavelli's hometown, and the Florentine Republic is very different from the Venetian Republic. While Venice, again, like I said, is La Serenissima, the Republic of Florence was constantly having governments rise and fall. There were riots, there were murders and killings as different families and groups are attempting to take power over. And one of the questions that Machiavelli will have is, why can't Florence get it together? But what he notices in the first couple chapters is that Rome, which was the greatest of ancient republics in his mind, was more like Florence than it was like Venice. Rome was not a calm place. Rome was a place with riots and killings and, people duking it out in the streets for political power. So then the question becomes to Machiavelli, why is Florence such a mess when Rome was so successful, and they both are characterized by this sort of domestic disturbances? And Machiavelli's answer is that the Romans figured out that they weren't going to be able to stop people from having rivalry and factions, so that instead they had to figure out a way to manage it and make it work. And this is how the Roman political institutions of like the tribunes and the consuls and things like that developed. In chapter 3 and 4, he talks about this, how Roman political institutions developed out of this realization that conflict is inevitable in a city. And so what one has to do is learn how to channel and manage that conflict rather than seeking to eliminate it. And I want to jump up to chapter 7, because chapter 7 is entitled, How Far Accusations May Be Necessary in a Republic to Maintain Its Freedom. And one of the things that Machiavelli is going to argue for in chapter 7 and also in chapter 8 is that citizens have to be able to accuse each other, right? Since conflict is inevitable, there has to be a way for these conflicts to be aired, right? There has to be an airing of grievances. And he distinguishes between accusation and calumny. And the difference between accusation and calumny for Machiavelli is not whether one is true and the other is false, but rather about the way in which the claim is made. An accusation is sort of made in the courts or to some official body in the city. Calumny is when you are just talking trash about someone. So he says that calumnies give rise to disorder. When someone can just, stand up on the street and start shouting about how awful this or that person is, right, that can give rise to disorder. But when somebody has to go into a court and prove that this person is awful, and then that person is able to defend themselves in the court, and then if we are persuaded that that person is awful, the court will, pronounce punishment, that channels the discord into a way that is profitable for the city, or at least not dangerous for the city. Basically, chapters 1 through 9, Machiavelli is talking about the inevitability of conflict in the city and how cities have to be designed on the assumption that people are going to be fighting with each other, and then build their institutions to deal with that. Now, they're not going to be able to eliminate this because it's natural for human beings to have disagreements, arguments, and fights. It's not natural for us to live together in harmony. Which brings us to chapter 9. Chapter 9 says, "It is necessary to be alone if one wishes to order a republic anew or reform it altogether outside its ancient orders." So this leads Machiavelli to a discussion of Romulus. Romulus is the legendary founder of Rome, right? And the legend of the founding of Rome has it that there were two twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, and they were going to found a city. Then, as part of the founding of the city, they were building a wall, and Romulus and Remus had a disagreement about the wall, and Romulus killed his brother Remus. And the killing of Remus is seen as the founding act of the city of Rome. So that Rome is founded, in a sense, by a murder. And not just by a murder, but by the murder of a twin brother. Now, normally, this action that Romulus does is seen as, if not horribly wrong, at least very problematic. Even ancient Roman authors like Cicero had a problem with this. Machiavelli is perhaps the first person to say that what Romulus did was right. Machiavelli thinks that Romulus was right for a very specific reason, and not the reason that Romulus had. Right? Romulus thought, well, my brother disrespected me, so I'm going to kill him. Machiavelli says that Romulus was right because when you're setting up a new thing, you can only have one leader. And so he had to be alone. And so he had to kill Remus. So Machiavelli says that this should be taken as a general rule, that it never or rarely happens that any republic or kingdom is ordered well from the beginning or reformed altogether anew outside its old orders unless it is ordered by one individual. It is indeed necessary that one alone give the mode, and that any such ordering depend on his mind. So a prudent orderer of a republic, who has the intent to wish to help not himself but the common good, not for his own succession but for the common fatherland, should contrive to have authority alone. Nor will a wise understanding ever reprove anyone for any extraordinary action that he uses in order to constitute a kingdom or a republic. It is very suitable that when the deed accuses him, the effect excuses him. And when the effect is good, as was that of Romulus, it will excuse the deed. Right, so what Machiavelli is saying is that, right, you have to be alone when you're ordering a republic. Right, when you're starting something new and you're bringing all these people together to live together who don't want to, right? It's not natural for us to live together. You have to essentially force them to live together. He thinks that in order to force them to live together, there has to be one person at the top of the pile. Right? You can't have anyone second-guessing you or undermining you. Right? So Romulus, for the good of Rome, Machiavelli thinks, had to kill his brother Remus. And as awful as that sounds, Machiavelli thinks that this was the correct thing to do, and that anyone who doesn't see this does not have, as he puts it, a wise understanding. Well, who doesn't see that? Who is critical of Romulus? Well, I mentioned Cicero is. If Plato or Aristotle had known about Romulus, right, they were ancient Greeks, so they didn't know about Romulus. But if they had known about Romulus, they also would have been critical of him. We can't imagine Socrates saying, hey, Romulus, good job murdering your brother, right? That's not the kind of thing that Socrates would say, right? Socrates would be horrified by Romulus. So, in a sense, Machiavelli is asking his readers to choose between Machiavelli and Romulus or Socrates. And he's suggesting that the Socratic tradition doesn't really have a wise understanding of things, that the Socratic tradition is, in a sense, naive. Right? So as you go down a little farther, Machiavelli will say, people are more prone to do evil than to do good. And so you have to force people to be good. And that is, in a sense, what Romulus was able to do. And the first sort of display of his force was the murder of his brother Remus. With that happy note, I'll wrap up this video about chapters 1 through 10, and in the next video, I'll get after the next chapters that we're reading.